Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 7 o'clock main news. In tonight's headlines, the acting Premier and Foreign Minister chairs Kuwait's delegation to the extraordinary meeting of the Organisation of Islamic Cooperation. The Deputy Premier and Minister of Defence stresses the significance of the role played by governors in implementing the state's public policy. Further aid planes arrive in the Gaza Strip as Israeli-Palestinian peace talks continue in Egypt. And Nouri al-Maliki vows to take the country's president to court for violating constitutional rules. The acting Premier and Foreign Minister Sheikh Sabah al-Khalid al-Hamad al-Sabah chairs the State of Kuwait's delegation to the extraordinary meeting of the Organisation of Islamic Cooperation held today in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, to discuss developments of the Israeli aggression on the occupied Palestinian territories. During the meeting, Sheikh Sabah al-Khalid renewed Kuwait's constant stance in supporting international efforts that seek an immediate and unconditional halt for the Israeli aggression on the occupied Palestinian territories. He then condemned the racial practices of the Israeli occupation authorities and stressed the necessity of forcing Israel to bear the legal responsibility of the wide losses of the Palestinian people as a result of the brutal aggression on Gaza. The Deputy Premier and Minister of Defence Sheikh Jarrah al-Sabah stressed the significance of the role played by governors in implementing the state's public policy and following up with citizens' affairs in line with serving the public interest. The Ministry's Directorate of Moral Guidance and Public Relations said in a statement that Sheikh Khalid al-Jarrah received the capital's Governor, retired Lieutenant General Thabit al-Mhanna, and the Governor of Hawali, retired Lieutenant General Sheikh Ahmed Nawaf al-Ahmed al-Sabah. The Minister of Defence expressed appreciation over the efforts exerted by governors contributing to establishing stability in the country under the wise leadership of His Highness the Emir and Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces, Sheikh Sabah al-Ahmed al-Jabir al-Sabah, His Highness the Crown Prince, Sheikh Nawaf al-Ahmed al-Jabir al-Sabah, and His Highness Sheikh Jabir al-Mbarak al-Hamad al-Sabah, the Prime Minister. The Kuwait Red Crescent Society sent a third plane with tons of medical supplies to the Gaza Strip to meet the shortage in Gaza hospitals. The aid campaign comes upon the instructions of His Highness the Emir, Sheikh Sabah al-Ahmed al-Jabir al-Sabah, in a move to ease the worsening humanitarian situation for Palestinians living in Gaza. Majd al-Wahidi has more details in the following report.
A load of 10 tons of humanitarian aid has been delivered to Gaza from the State of Kuwait. The convoy consists of medical supplies and will be delivered by Kuwait Red Crescent Society to the Palestine Red Crescent Society. This medical aid will assist hospitals in treating war casualties prompted by Israeli aggression on the besieged Strip.
We want to say to the people of Kuwait that your donation and aids are delivering Gaza and are in safe hands now. By your help, we heal the wounds and injuries of Palestinians in the hospitals. This is second load of aids, and there are promises of more aids, and also a delegation from the Red Crescent Society will visit us soon. We say to Kuwait thank you, and we welcome all Kuwaitis in our country.
This is not the first time Kuwait has sent aid to Gaza. It's part of an airlift recently launched by Kuwait Red Crescent Society to transport urgent humanitarian aid to Gaza to alleviate the sufferings of people who experienced a bloody Israeli offensive during the last 4 weeks, which led to massive human losses and extreme shortage of medical supplies and equipment.
First, by name of Palestinian Red Crescent Society, I would like to thank Kuwaitian government and Kuwaitian people for their support for Palestinian people in this hard situation, and of course this donation will support the health system, which is already exhausted through the last 8 years of siege and also 3 wars in last 5 years or 6 years.
Kuwait is among the first Arab countries to help Gazans in their plight and suffering. This aid is not only a move out of solidarity, but also an action of humanity in time of an unjust war and aggression imposed on the people of Gaza. Delivering Kuwaiti aid to people of Gaza is not something new. Kuwaiti aid continues to be a lifeline for those who are suffering. People here say that the state of Kuwait is far in distance, but close to their hearts. Majd al-Wahidi, Kuwait TV, Gaza.
A temporary Israel-Hamas truce was holding for a second day as indirect negotiations on a lasting ceasefire and a long-term solution for the battered Gaza Strip were set to resume in Cairo. The latest 72-hour ceasefire took effect at midnight after a similar three-day truce collapsed on Friday when Palestinian gunmen resumed rocket fire on Israel as both sides were unable to make any headway in the Egypt-hosted talks. Hamas is seeking an end to an Israeli-Egyptian border blockade of the Gaza Strip, while Israel wants Hamas to disarm. Meanwhile, sources said that no incidents between the two sides were registered overnight. Neither Hamas rocket fire at Israel nor the Israeli strikes on Gaza. Iraqi Prime Minister Noor al-Maliki was dealt a severe blow in his contentious quest for a third term when the country's president and its leading political bloc called on another lawmaker to form a new government. With Iraq's government deadlocked and the nation confronting a grave threat from militants, President Fuad Massoum nominated Haider al-Abadi, the Deputy Parliament Speaker, to be Iraq's next Prime Minister, the nation's most powerful post. In response, al-Maliki, who has served in a caretaker capacity since the elections in April, went on national television to accuse the president of launching a coup against the constitutional and the political process and vowing a court challenge. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry insisted today that U.S. combat forces will not re-enter Iraq, confirming that his country will explore more political, economic and security options with Baghdad. Meanwhile, U.S. President Barack Obama lauded Iraqi President Fuad Massoum for naming Haider al-Abadi as Iraq's new Prime Minister designate, calling it an important step on the path towards a more inclusive government that would unite Iraq's different communities. During a news conference, Obama also urged all Iraqi political leaders to work peacefully through the political process in the days ahead, adding that the fight against terrorism would be easier once a new government was put into place.
Today, President Massoum named a new Prime Minister designate, Dr. Haider al-Abadi. Under the Iraqi Constitution, this is an important step towards forming a new government that can unite Iraq's different communities. Earlier today, Vice President Biden and I called Dr. Abadi to congratulate him and to urge him to form a new cabinet as quickly as possible. All Iraqis. I pledged our support to him as well as to
Australian Foreign Minister Julie Bishop defended today a deal to deploy 2,500 US Marines in the country, denying it was aimed at curbing a rising China with tensions growing in the region. Beijing bristled when the deal to be signed off at annual security talks was announced as part of the US pivot to Asia in 2011. But Bishop, hosting US Secretary of State John Kerry and Defence Secretary Chuck Hagel in Sydney, said the rotation of Marines into the northern city of Darwin was the natural evolution of their alliance. Speaking ahead of the Australia-US ministerial consultations, Bishop said it was aimed at supporting the long-term peace, stability and prosperity of their region, the Indian Ocean, Asia Pacific, and denied the agreement was aimed at hindering China. The UN Security Council ambassadors met the leaders of South Sudan's warring sides today in a bid to end 8 months of conflict that has pushed the young nation to the brink of famine. British Ambassador Mark Lyle Grant said the diplomats arrived in the capital on a two-day visit to engage with leaders and witness the humanitarian crisis as thousands of people have been killed and over 1.5 million have fled months of carnage. This came a day after the United States condemned South Sudan's government and rebels for failing to form a transitional government by Sunday's deadline, calling it an outrage and an insult to their citizens. In an unusually harsh statement, US Secretary of State John Kerry faulted both sides for their failure to settle their differences and to meet an August 10th deadline to form a transitional unity government. A World Health Organization panel of medical ethics experts ruled today that it was ethical to offer unproven drugs or vaccines to people infected or at risk in West Africa's deadly Ebola outbreak. The panel said the first tests in humans would be conducted over the next 2 to 4 months, but cautioned supplies would be limited. The ethics meeting was called after experimental Ebola drug ZMapp was given to 2 American health workers infected with Ebola in Liberia. A 75-year-old priest in Spain who received ZMapp has since died. The experimental drug, of which a WHO spokeswoman said only 12 doses were made, was due to be given to 2 Liberian doctors after US authorities approved its export. The West Africa Ebola virus epidemic death toll rose to at least 1,013 of the more than 1,848 people it has infected in Guinea, Liberia, Sierra Leone and Nigeria. 9 people have been injured in clashes between police and residents of Colombia's northern La Guajira province, demanding more government support for the impoverished region. La Guajira is currently suffering from a drought, and locals say the authorities haven't done enough to mitigate its effects on the population. Riot police were deployed to clear roadblocks and remove burning cars. President Juan Manuel Santos travelled to the province on the weekend, his first trip since he was inaugurated for a second term in office on Thursday, and announced that his government would help local authorities build 100 wells to ensure residents had access to drinking water at all times. And moving to local financial news, the 3 main indices of the Kuwait Stock Exchange were positive by the end of today's trading session, with the price index gaining 3 points and settling at the level of 7,234 points. The KSX 15 also put on 2 points and registered at 1,195 points. The share of the Sultan Center Food Products Company was the top gainer of the day, while that of the Salbuch Trading Company suffered the biggest loss during the session. Robin Williams, the actor whose madcap comic style made him one of television and film's biggest stars, was remembered as a creative genius today as family, friends and fans mourned his death in an apparent suicide at the age of 63. Williams had been recently suffering from severe depression and was discovered unconscious and not breathing overnight in his home in San Francisco. The cause of death was under investigation as an autopsy was conducted earlier today. For a chance to see our reports again, please visit our YouTube channel at MOI Kuwait News. And to recap tonight's news, here are the headlines once again. The acting Premier and Foreign Minister chairs Kuwait's delegation to the extraordinary meeting of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. The Deputy Premier and Minister of Defence stresses the significance of the role played by the governors in implementing the state's public policy. Further aid planes arrive in the Gaza Strip as Israeli-Palestinian peace talks continue in Egypt. And Noor al-Maliki vows to take the country's president to court for violating constitutional rules. Thank you for joining us. Have a good evening.